This week we covered casting, Boolean operators, and logical operators that we at least started, so let's watch the video for those today. Let's start with our casting. So we kind of already know the idea of the slides, but I'll flip through them because it was a little bit of a confusing topic this week. Essentially, casting is, well, kind of like casting an actor. You are taking one type of variable, say an int, and casting it as a different one. So kind of like casting a movie actor in a famous role. Obviously, they're not those characters, but we cast them as those characters despite that. So we're going to take a look at the slides. What if we want our int to be a double, or a double to be an int, blah, blah, blah. We're going to cast them. So casting, essentially, when we assign a value to the variable, we put in parentheses what we want to cast it as. So this 5.3 is going to be cast as an int, which means we truncate it and only take the 5. X is an integer, so if we want to cast an int as a double, our 5 becomes a 5.0 when we do that. So X is an int, cast it as a double, and the double Y gets that value. It'll get 5.0, it'll add that 0.0 because doubles always have a point something after it. This is the opposite. Now we're going to get an integer where it's assigned a double that's cast as an int. So 10.3 just gets truncated. Since doubles are kind of a higher type or a more detailed type, if we don't have to actually say that this int x is a double, it'll just automatically add a 0.0 for us. So let's take a look at some of the quizzes and exercises. What is casting? I thought this was funny. What Carol does when she breaks her leg? No, it's turning a value of one type into another. And what is this equal to? If we cast 9.9, it'll truncate it, so it'll be 9. Here's the example. 100 divided by 40 is essentially the problem we're doing here. And since we cast one of these operators as a double, the answer will have that here. If we get rid of it, it'll now truncate it, because these are both ints. We get 2.0. So we can put double wherever. Before it was on the back, now it's on the front. We get 2.5. If we cast the whole operation, we're going to find that it'll get truncated. Try to think about why this is for a second. Maybe pause the video and think. Okay, well, this is because we're dividing an int by an int, so our answer will then be an int. So we'll have 2 here, and then we'll cast that 2 as a double. In fact, if we assign a new variable that equaled this, we'd see that it would be 2. But we don't really need to do that. We kind of got the idea from playing around. You can always play around with these. These are great ways to experiment with the code, because they kind of give you something already to experiment with. Here's the exercise casting to an int. We're going to have the user input a double. Highly recommend always keeping these open over here, the documentation. It makes it a lot easier to find different equations, different lines that you may not remember, and so on and so forth. Of course, the assignment, let's see what we are required to do. We want to read a double. We have that. We want to cast this value to an int and then print the int. So we're going to need to declare an int. Call it cast it double, because that's what it's going to be. So there's our declaration, and we're also going to initialize it here. We're going to cast my double as an int, and then print it. Again, most of these exercises here are meant for us to kind of experiment with the code and to kind of start learning our commands. They're not going to be very complicated. This one's 3 lines. If we really wanted to, we could do it in 2. So let's run it. So it's going to have a user input. Please enter your double, 4.2. And then it's going to cast that as an int and print the int, cast a double. Keep her going. Does little tests. This is pretty much the opposite. We're given 2 ints. We want to divide them and then print the result. However, we need to have a fraction. So it's going to basically automatically enter 3 and 4 for us, and we need to have a double that accepts it. So this is kind of like the exercise where we divide an int by an int, but we have to cast one of them as a double. So pretty much from back here. And I'll pop over just so we can see that. This is, remember, we did this and it doesn't work, but if we get rid of the things and we cast one of these as a double, let's say total, it gets us that double answer. So this is essentially what we're doing here in our exercise, casting to a double. Given two ints, first int, second int, and then we're going to get a double. We're going to call it my double for now. And this is the first divided by the second. Obviously, I didn't do something here. We just want to print it, so we're going to print out my double. Get used to typing system.out.println. So this is going to print out as what? Think about it for a second. What did I not do? 0, right? Because why didn't I do? What didn't I do? I didn't cast one of these. So let's cast in one of them. See that it works. We get it. Hooray. We'll explore the next two exercises and then go through booleans, which shouldn't be too bad. And we'll be done with this video for the week. So here's an example text. I know it's a lot of code, so you might just want to stop and think, what's going on here? This is an example or code to play around with it. We're casting order of operations. So we're kind of testing our order of operations, right? Let's see where that happens. This is kind of what we were doing earlier. Remember, I switched the double. I switched the location of the double in the example, and that changed how the thing got cast. So casting takes place before any operations unless you put parentheses. So here and here, we're going to get the same answer. It'll run out and print it. But if we cast neither, we just get into division. If we cast outside the parentheses, same deal. It kind of messes up again. And then down here, we have some order of operations which would mess it up. Casting the wrong element. We cast a 5 rather than the division here, and it's going to give us the wrong answer because casting a 5 and then adding it doesn't really do much. But if we cast the actual division, we'll get the right answer. So you're kind of just encouraged to run this, look at the code, look at the printout statements, and keep on going. Notice here it kind of gives us a little space between them just so we can kind of see what's better. If we're bug testing, this is a great idea. This is our rounding. Remember doing this in class, we kind of added half to all of them, and it kind of helped us fix our rounding, because when we cast a double to an int, we're going to truncate it. So if we add 0.5, if it's under 0.5, let's say 10.4, it'll round it to 10.9, then truncate it, so on and so forth. If it's over 0.5, if it's 0.5, it will print out it'll add it, make it round it, and then truncate it, so it works kind of the same way as rounding it. Just noticed I was using one with negative numbers from the AP side of the course. So kind of the same deal here. We just add 0.5 to all of them, and if we have, when it goes to 10.5, if we were to round 10, we'd round it to 10, right? So just truncating a 0.5 will also round it. If it's over 0.5 or equal to 0.5, like here, here, and here, it goes to 11.0, 11.2, 11.4, and then truncating them will properly round it. So let's run, see what happens. Don't worry about negative numbers for now. You kind of need to think when you're rounding the negative numbers, you kind of truncate them to round them down, which is really rounding them up. They're opposite signs. So if you do work with negative numbers, think about that, but don't worry too much. That's more from the AP side. And now let's move to the exercise. So our exercise running using casting kind of gave away the goat. We need to add a half, then round. So let's look at our assignment and see what we need to do. We're getting a user input, which they give us already. And then we're going to round it to the appropriate number. So we kind of just add half to it. Remember how we're cast properly with order of operations. So let's make it int. We'll call it rounded rating. We're going to we don't need to initialize any value. Well, we kind of do. We're going to put our casting on it, right? So we're going to have that movie rating plus 0.5, and we need to remember to cast. So definitely using an int. Let's get rid of that extra multiplication. But what are we going to cast? we're going to add a half and then cast it. So my, or movie, rating plus 0.5. And then we need to print it. Let's take a look at our output. See that it works properly. 3.4. Oh, that messed up something there. Oh, I made it equal to 0.5. Let's do plus equals to 0.5. Make sure that works. Run it again. Looks good. One problem I was seeing during class was seeing us kind of do every output at once. We only need to get the double once. We don't need to do multiple user inputs. Look at the example properly. Make sure you're reading. A run means we have just these two outputs. Another run, a second run, another two inputs. And then here's obviously a third. We're kind of following along with these here. I only do it once. Check the hint. Tells us we can kind of basically are just copying from the exercise before. There's the answer. We could probably do this in one line if we really wanted to, but 3 is fine. If you were curious about the 2-line solution, here it is. You just kind of cast it directly in your print line. I don't recommend doing this. The extra parentheses are going to likely confuse you, and it's not really good practice. It's kind of just, hey, we can do this really short, can't we? And we did.